button. Hello, welcome back to another horticulture Zoom meeting. I'm Christian Stevenson with the Mississippi State University Extension Service in Hancock County. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you very much. Just want to remind you that if you do have any questions that you weren't able to ask them because you were watching this on YouTube, weren't here for the live presentation, you can put the questions down in the comment section of the YouTube channel, and I will be very happy to respond to those and get you the answers to those questions. And I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because that'll let you be notified whenever new presentations are uploaded. I'm very pleased today that I'm being joined by Ms. Polly Cuevas. She is the manager of Pine Hills Nursery in Harrison County. And the reason we have her here today is some of the questions that I've gotten in evaluations and some of the suggestions that I've had are really good questions for a nursery manager. And she has been kind enough to join us today so that I can give her some questions and get her response. And of course, as we usually do at the end of the presentation, you can always go ahead while we're talking. If you have any questions, you can put those over in the chat area and we'll just get those into the conversation. And we'll have some time at the end if you have any more questions where we can make sure that we get you an answer to those. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Ms. Cuevas. Just kind of asked to start us off telling us a little bit about Pine Hills Nursery and what you do in the nursery business.
Hello, Christian, and everyone that's joining. My name is Polly Cuevas, and we own Pine Hills Nursery in Pasquistan, Mississippi. And this is a family-owned business. We've been in business since 1986. When we started out, we had one small retail shop and one 30 by 96 greenhouse. Way back in 1986. We started out as a wholesale grower of bedding plants, vegetables and flowers. And we sold our bedding plants here locally on the Mississippi coast, as well as in New Orleans and Hattiesburg. So that's kind of how we started out. Over time, we evolved into strictly retail, just because customers were just dropping by wanting to buy from us. So we've been selling to the public. And so now we're strictly retail. We now have 8 30 by 96 greenhouses. We have a shrub area, a tree retail area, a retail shop. So we have big space and a lot of area to offer to people for retail. And also because of all of our greenhouse space, we're able to grow a lot of our own plants, which helps with varying the choices that people have. It's not like a cookie cutter type nursery where everybody has the same product year after year. We're able to have some of our own additions and things that are a little bit different because we're able to grow and propagate some of our own plants. So it's been family owned here at Pine Hills since 1986.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to kind of go down a list of questions that I thought of. And again, I encourage people, if they have questions, to put those over in the chat area. And you kind of touched on this, but one of the things that I'm always curious about is how people get involved with the green industry. I tell people that my father was a pharmacist, not a farmer. Just curious how you got involved in the green industry, how you got involved in plants as a career.
Well, in my case, I've always had a love for plants and flowers growing up. And when I was 19 years old, I needed a job. And so I applied at a local wholesale grower and got a job there, and I actually worked there for 6 years. They grew wholesale bedding, potted plants, actually holiday plants, and sold to the same areas that we sold to in our beginnings, New Orleans, Hattiesburg. They actually sold in Baton Rouge and Lafayette, Louisiana as well. So that's how I got started with that job. And then, we eventually opened our own nursery.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and say, these questions may be a little bit out of a rational order because I just kind of wrote them down as I was thinking of them. But one of the questions that, or the things that I always like to look at when I'm going to the nursery is kind of what's new or what's particularly interesting. So as we are getting into or approaching, I guess we're actually into the fall now. What are some of the plants you would want people to be particularly aware of or looking out for as we get into this time of year?
Well, we like for our customers to be successful with their plants, so we try to help in any way we can with advice. And one thing that, a lot of people know, but maybe not everyone, that fall is a really good time for planting, especially fruit, shade, and flowering trees, and also shrubs. The reason being that in our zone, which is zone 9, the ground stays relatively warm, and so throughout fall and winter, these roots are growing and getting established, and so that really helps you with your plants next summer when the conditions are quite a bit harsher for newly planted items. So very good time to plant for those reasons. And as I mentioned, various types of trees, fruit, shade, and flowering, shrubs. And then, of course, for fall and winter, there are also a lot of flowering plants that do well. And they will go from fall right up until springtime, really. And those, mainly the ones that are used quite often in this area are pansies, snapdragons, dianthus, flowering or ornamental kale and cabbage, and of course chrysanthemums. Some people like chrysanthemums because you get some instant fall color, and that's great. But another plus about those is that they're perennial, pretty low maintenance, really easy care, and you can have them for years, and they give you that nice fall color. And really, another thing we like to tell people, and some folks do know this, that you can still use some of the summer annuals, for instance, petunias and even begonias, right up until cold weather, because they really like cool temperatures. They really perform better in the fall than in the heat of the summer. So some of those things can continue to thrive right up until a hard freeze, which here is sometimes, not until December or later. So a lot of good things to plant this year and great time to plant.
Yeah, my wife's favorite flower are snapdragons, and my favorite are dianthus. So this is a great time of year for us because those are our two favorites and two that we frequently have going in this time of year. So when people come to a nursery, what are some things that you think that they should consider when they're looking for new plants?
Well, when people come to us and have questions, there's some basic things we ask them. First of all, you want to be sure that plants that they are considering using are going to do well in our zone, which is considered zone 9 here on the coast. So just be sure that, looking through catalogs and magazines that, you see something beautiful, be sure and do a little bit of research and make sure that it's going to grow in our zone and do well. And then a few other things we always ask is, what is the sun exposure in the plant, in the area you're going to plant? Is it sun for 8 hours a day? Is it 4 hours a day? Is the sun direct? Is it dappled? That's pretty important to choose the right plant. So, before you go to purchase plants, do a little looking around the yard different times of the day and kind of make notes of your sun exposure. And then another real important aspect we tell people to pay attention to is soil condition. And I know that's sort of vague, but in my opinion, soil condition is extremely important. And I think the texture of the soil is really important because it's going to allow tender new roots to grow if it's soft and coarse, and roots can establish in that. And there are extremes. Many times the soil is very compacted. And then if you live near the beach, on the other hand, you're going to have very sandy soil. So all this can be corrected to some degree with amending, with compost, good quality topsoil, various amendments to improve that soil. And that's very important. You don't want to just say, okay, I've bought all these plants, I'm just going to go dig a hole and plant them. You want to be sure you're giving them the best chance to perform well, and soil is a big part of that. Another thing to consider when you're purchasing or looking at plants is the dimensions of the area where you want to plant. If you have an area, just know the length and width approximately. So that will give an idea of how many plants you may need depending on your choices. And always consider the mature size of your plants, you know, not just the size they are when you purchase them. Quite often people overcrowd things because they want sort of instant gratification. But if you can allow some space, considering the mature size of your plants, you know, you'll be better off in the long run. So I think, and one last thing I'll mention is sometimes people have limitations on how large or small they want plants to be, especially how large because of windows or viewing areas. So just consider all that, you know, where your window spaces are, if you want to be able to see out of those windows, if the plants are okay to encroach in that a little bit. So I would say that. So sun exposure, soil condition, dimensions of the planting area, and, you know, mature limitations of the plants. You know, the plants at maturity would be some of the most important things. And it's also very important to get soil tests done through the extension office, because that will let you know your soil pH and if there needs to be any, you know, any corrections that need to be made to allow your plants to thrive. Those would be some of the main things I would say to know.
Well, that's great. Thank you. So there were a couple of people, you know, in the questions that I've gotten, they're really kind of maybe on the business side or on the you know, questions about how running a nursery works. And one of those is how, you know, plant breeders are you know, busy, you know, putting out new varieties and new plants, and new plants become popular. So how do you as a nursery manager sort of connect to the industry and learn about the new things that are coming out?
Well, we do have opportunities to go to different seminars and educational programs in our industry. Some of those through Mississippi State or Mississippi Nursery and Landscape Association, and then through Mississippi State, through LSU. There are opportunities out there for us to attend these meetings, and there are usually some really informed representatives from various companies that sell and develop and do research on new plants. And so they're there to, you know, promote and let us know what the new things that are coming out, what their good qualities are, why they're new and improved, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of good information that comes out in these various meetings and seminars. And a lot of money is put into these research programs and actually patenting and marketing these new plants. So they really want to get the word out to people like us that are trying to, you know, get the word to the public. So there are opportunities, and we do try to take advantage of those whenever we can. Otherwise, we sort of get stuck in a loop that we're not doing anything new, and we want to stay current for sure for our customers.
Sure. I always think of the, you know, kind of as an example, the meeting that's in Mobile once a year. It's the I'm going to say the name of it wrong. It's the Gulf Coast Horticulture Expo, or I know that that's close to the name, but that kind of is would be an example of what you're talking about, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you know, one thing I have, you know, I've met quite a few master gardeners at events like that. So, and you know, a lot of those meetings, in addition to be you know, opening to nursery managers, you do see a good bit of the public there as well. So another part of that is, you know, particularly because you mentioned that that you produce some of the plants that you sell there at Pine Hills, as well as work with commercial nurseries. And this is kind of a business question again. So how do you decide what to propagate there at the nursery, or what to work with commercial nurseries with, or for?
Well, we're always on the lookout for something new, something a little different. But we also, take into account, how well it performs. We don't want to just get something because it's pretty. We want to be sure that it's, well performing in the garden. And one thing we can't do is we can't propagate patented plants. That is strictly enforced. Can't do that, prohibited. So we can only do things that are non-patented, which is okay. There's a lot of good plants out there that are non-patented. So what we look at is we try to find something with good qualities that we think would be attractive in customers' gardens. And then we try to propagate them. We try different methods to propagate and see how easily they can be propagated. So if they do well and are not hard to propagate, well, we go ahead with it and try to find out as much information as we can about these new plants, and then offer them, the next season that we can after propagation. Sometimes, depending on the rate of, propagation success, it is, more cost effective to just buy some plants. But we're limited to what other growers grow. And so that's why we like to do some of our own. There's no limits except for not propagating patented plants. So that allows us some freedom to pick and choose and find some things where we're not only held to what other wholesalers grow. So cost of propagation, length of time to get something from propagated to sellable size, all that is taken into consideration. But we do try to always offer some new and different plants to our customers each year.
And I think, something that I learned in trying to, in approaching plant propagation, that I was a little, I guess, surprised by is every plant that you work with really does have differences in how well or how you should propagate it. So it's a pretty complicated procedure, just figuring out what the best way to propagate something is. When I first got involved with that, I was really surprised at how much difference there is between different plants. Trying to propagate magnolia versus trying to propagate, something like crepe myrtle. So that's certainly kind of an intensive thing.
And I will say too, the times of year that you propagate certain plants matters. Certain things do well in certain seasons. And so you can try to propagate something in the wrong season and you're never going to have any success. But if you can figure out what's the right time to propagate a particular plant, it can work really well.
I was having the worst time trying to propagate a persimmon tree for somebody. Just kept having failure after failure. And it turned out I was taking the cuttings at the wrong time. And once I took the cuttings at the right time of year, everything worked out.
It is pretty amazing.
May have been me too, but so going kind of back to people's experience as they visit a nursery. When somebody brings home a plant from the nursery, a couple of questions I've gotten. Of course, I preach to people about plant quarantine and making sure they're not introducing anything. But there's also a lot of adaptation that needs to go on in a plant when it comes from the nursery environment to the home environment. So do you have any special advice that you would give homeowners when they purchase a plant at the nursery and then get it home to get it into their landscape?
What you said is very true, Christian, because sometimes you might purchase something at a nursery, a plant that was maybe in a shaded area, but it's going to be put in a partial sun area, which may be okay for that plant, but you don't want to take it from that shaded area and put it out in 8 hours of sun in one day. You know what I mean? You want to acclimate it to different exposures if that happens to be the case from where you purchased it. But the main thing we tell people is, suppose you get your plants home, you want to be sure to keep them watered until they're planted. So be sure to water them regularly as needed. So you'll want to also check your soil before you just start digging holes and planting. Check and see that, the texture, like I mentioned before, the water holding qualities or lack thereof of the soil before you actually start just sticking them in the ground. And so be prepared to, amend the soil if you need to with those things in mind. So take your plants home, be sure they're watered well until time to plant. And then before digging or before actually putting them in the ground, arrange them, move them around, change them around, arrange them to be sure you like the arrangement before you dig the first hole. And I would always advise to have some amendments on hand in case you need them if you haven't checked for that beforehand. Then once you've done that and you're ready to plant, you've arranged them like you want, this goes without saying, but of course remove the container that they're in. And if any roots are matted or really dense, you'll want to use like a garden fork or some sort of a rake or tool to loosen those roots so they'll come out of that root ball that they're real tight in. So you want to promote them going out into the soil. So loosen some up so they're sticking out from that root ball, and then plant them, and be sure to plant them at the correct level. And when I say that, I mean the top of that root ball, the very top of the soil, needs to be ground level, even with the ground, or even just ever so slightly above, never below ground level. So, adjust your planting holes to make that happen. You want that to be even with the ground. And then once all your plants are put in, water them real thoroughly, a real soaking watering, not with a sprinkler, just really water them thoroughly. And as a general rule, you want to water thoroughly and then let the soil dry out a little bit before watering again. Don't go out there every single day watering. It'll be too much. But you're going to have to figure out the length of time in between watering by just checking the soil before watering each time. And, it may be 4 or 5 days, it may be a week, but thorough watering and only watering when needed will promote deep reaching roots, which is what you want to get your plants established. And when I say that, I don't mean let them go so dry that the plant gets under stress, but do be aware not to overwater in the process of getting those established. And then you also will want to know, in the particular plants you chose, you're going to need to know when they need to be fertilized and pruned. A lot of flowering plants, it's important to know which season to prune them in, as to not interfere with their blooming season. And generally speaking, this, I don't say this has to be 100% of the time, but generally speaking, you don't normally want to fertilize when you put the plants in. You want to let the roots get established some before you do that, because you don't want to start growing the top before the roots have gotten hold and started to establish. So that's kind of a general rule of thumb, in my opinion.
I think all of that's really good advice. I suspect I might know the answer to this, but it's another question that I've got from participants in these programs. What do you think is talking about the spring season and the fall season where we're usually doing most of our planting, what do you think are the best times to go and visit the nursery?
Well, because we grow a lot of our own plants here, as far as in the greenhouses, we're growing stuff all winter. But as all of you might know in the area, it's really not safe to plant tender things until March, and really mid-March is best. But we have lots of things that we're growing. Things become ready in March. We sometimes have warm spells in late February. So I would say, as far as planting time and best plant selections, that would be March and April. Some of that will, bleed over into May, but then we start to get a little bit warmer. So March and April are really prime times to visit nurseries in the springtime. And then on the reverse of that, October and November, for the same reasons. Temperatures are best, planting times are best, and selections are best. So October and November for the fall.
All right. And I just want to add a little bit of a note to that, that, of course, in addition to plants there at the nursery, I know at Pine Hills you have quite an extensive collection of decorative containers for plants. You have, in a lot of the sort of the mainstays that you need for gardening. So if you need insecticides or pesticides, fertilizers and things like that, local nurseries and local garden stores are a good location to purchase those. And often in my experience, particularly, coming from the entomology and plant pathology side of things, the selection that you have for, sort of the appropriate chemicals for different things is a lot easier to get at a local nursery rather than necessarily going to a big box store. I'm not necessarily speaking ill of big box stores, but in my experience, the selection of products that you carry is a lot more suitable for home gardening, and you tend to have a broader availability of that sort of thing. I know that that's not really a question, that's just a kind of statement from my experience.
Yeah, I will say that Christian has worked with us very closely when we have a question about his recommendation for a pesticide, because there's so many out there and always new ones being introduced. We try to stay in tune with that, but it's hard to keep up sometimes with all the new ones coming out. So Christian is very helpful with that. So sometimes if we don't know the answer to the correct pesticide, it's really good to answer so we can answer that question to you on the spot. Or if you're having problems, to try to coordinate, some information so we can help you out with that.
Okay, moving on, one thing that people are really interested in is native plants. Particularly there's a lot of interest in sustainable landscaping, and using native plants is a component of that. So do you have some favorite native plants or native plants you're especially fond of for use in the home landscape?
Well, we do not carry a lot of native plants, but we do carry some, and the ones that we carry are very good and very popular. Some of the ones that I wanted to mention for a vine, Carolina jasmine is one. Of course, they're native azaleas. A lot of people call those honeysuckle azaleas. There's beautyberry, which the berries are becoming very beautiful on those right now, purple berries. And this is in no specific order, just a group of plants I wanted to mention. Black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckia, native milkweeds, which, there's a real push for that with the butterflies and whatnot to have some good source for their nutrients on their trips to the south. And also, this is a little bit out of that category, but another native is prickly pear cactus, which we're a little bit familiar with because we actually have tortoises here on the property. So we grow those to feed the tortoises. But anyway, that one came to mind. And then as far as some trees that are native, live oak, shoemarn oak, meadow oak, river birch, swamp maples, redbuds, mayhaw. A lot of people like those for jellies. So there are many, many natives out there that do well here. That was just kind of a short list that I wanted to mention. And Christian, you may have some you might want to mention.
Well, I'm just going to mention, you talked about the Rudbeckia, and this is going to kind of lead into the next question. Is this spring, when we were kind of first getting towards the social distancing things, I came in to build a couple of flower beds at my house, and I got all the plants from there at Pine Hills. I was so happy with it. I actually sent Polly a text of the image of one of the flower beds because I was so happy with how it turned out. So kind of leading into the next question, another thing that people are really interested in are butterfly plants and plants to attract hummingbirds. So do you have any suggestions or plants that you're particularly that you think are particularly great for our landscapes and to bring in those pollinators?
Yes, I do have a list. I know that we just talked about Rudbeckia, but there's several others that are very good. Pentas, as y'all may be familiar with, various salvias, which there are a lot of varieties of salvias that are perennial. Buddleia or butterfly bush is really excellent and also perennial. Lantana is a really good attractor. And then, as I mentioned, there's native milkweed as well as tropical milkweed, firebush, which the botanical name I believe is Amelia patens. Those are very good and they bloom this time of year. One of the vines that we grow here that's a very good attractor is Mexican flame vine. Very, very good for attracting critters. And there are many, many others, but those are some of the ones that are very good. And just by chance, I didn't realize this through all these years in this business, how good abelias are for attracting pollinators. I happen to plant a few outside of one of my windows, and they are always covered in various pollinators. So abelia is a very good plant to put in the landscape for that reason. Those are some of the main ones we recommend, but there are many others as well.
All right, thank you. I only have one more sort of a pre-prepared question for you. And then I have seen a question over in the chat area, and hopefully we'll have a few more. But I mentioned that you do and other nurseries or retail outlets, garden stores, have gardening products and things like that. But what are some other services that gardeners might go to their local nursery looking for? Aside from just the purchase of the plants?
Well, we do try to offer knowledgeable information from all of our staff. We try to, know what we're talking about when it comes to giving advice and advising customers and whatnot. And we offer specialty plants that differ from just, pretty cookie cutter stores. So we try to offer some specialty things that perform well here. We don't want to sell plants that are not going to do well here just because they're attractive and someone might think they're beautiful. We want to know that they perform well here before we'll sell them. And as well as our garden center, with our plants and all the various amendments to that, we also have a floral department at our garden center, which is run by our daughter, Rachel, which she's an MSU graduate in horticulture and floral design. So she runs a floral department for us where she does weddings, special events, parties, does all kind of floral arrangements for those type things. And then our nursery also offers landscaping services. Our son-in-law heads that up, so we offer that as well. And we've added something over the last few years just to kind of make it fun for families and people come with children, called our Wild Side Animal Exhibit. We have various little animals and enclosures for kids to come and see our animals. And it's just kind of a fun outing when families come out. We're out in the country and it's just somewhere to spend, a couple hours with the family. And another thing we offer we have opportunities for children's birthday parties. We do that here on the premises, where people can bring their whatever they want for their birthday parties and just enjoy a nice lunch or snack on the property. We also host various seminars, educational seminars, dealing with planting and various things to do with the green industry. And we've had experts from MSU and LSU, Christian included, which have held seminars at our nursery. One thing we did last year in the fall was we held our first Fall Frenzy, which was just like a festival for people to come with their children and just spend the day. It was a fun time, and we hope to continue that. Our parties and seminars and the Fall Frenzy are just on hold for now until things kind of get back to normal with the conditions with COVID-19. So we hope to restart all that sometime in the near future. And another thing I failed to mention, but I'll go back to, talking about my daughter and her floral department, she also offers what's called a snip and sip, which is a nice fun thing for people to get together and learn flower arranging. It's just little where you can register for a particular date and there's specific subject matter and things that will be arranged in those arrangements. So that's something else too. And so we offer various things, not just selling plants to people, And we're not a regular cookie cutter nursery for all those reasons, and we hope to continue that trend.
Okay, well, the first question I'm going to, and for those of you who can see the chat, I'm probably going to be going backwards because it's a little bit more convenient. So you may have to explain who we're talking about But there is a question over there about how old Chomper is.
Okay, Chomper is our resident alligator. He lives here on the property, and Chomper is 61 years old this year. So my father-in-law has had him since he was 7 inches long when he first got a whole nest of these alligators, and he's been on the property ever since. He's well taken care of, and he's quite an attraction. Many people come, and it's been multiple generations of people coming to see our alligator Chomper.
All right. And Miss Hollander is asking for aloe vera, what type of soil would be best for that?
I would just say any kind of well-draining potting soil. You know, you can buy lots and lots of different soils, you know, at stores these days. Just be sure you're getting a good quality. Don't go for price as much as you do for quality, because you want your plants to succeed, and the soil is real important with that. So just a real coarse, well-draining potting soil, I would say.
All right. Another question, and if you ever see someone at the nursery doing this, it may be my fault because I tell them to. But do you mind gardeners taking the plant out of the pot to look at the root system before they buy it?
Oh, no, not at all. I feel free. That's no problem at all. And, you know, I will say certain times of the year that might be more the case. You know, when you get into late summer, we've had a few plants hanging around all season. You might run into that a little bit. So we try to limit the amount of plants that are on the property that are like that, but every now and then something may be that way. So please do. Feel free to
it's easy. It's easy for them to get out of hand. If a local nursery doesn't have a specific plant or a particular variety that something would look at, what would be a good way to approach you about possibly ordering something for them?
Well, I will say, generally speaking, I'm the purchasing person. So I kind of know what's out there with the people that we purchase from. And so if you tell me what you're looking for, I can usually tell you right then if it's a possibility or if it's not available to me. And if it's a possibility, what we do is take your telephone number and your name and your request. And then in the process of us ordering in the coming days and weeks, we look for the plant you're requesting with our wholesalers. And if at all possible, we get them for you. But I do try to explain to people that that will all depend on when we're making truckload orders, because there are minimums we have to reach. So we can't buy small amounts of plants, but we certainly can tack them on to our existing orders if they're available to us.
All right. And this is about individual plants. If you were going, looking at the same type of plant, do you think it's better to select a short, compact plant or a tall, compact plant?
I would say, just as you said, it might depend on the type of plant, because some of them, the characteristics may be that they're tall and lanky. You know what I mean? So it depends on the plant, but my personal opinion would be to pick short and stocky, because there is plenty time for them to grow. And, but it does depend on the plant variety, because some are going to tend to be just taller and lankier in general.
All right. Let's see. Do you have any top recommendations on containerized fruit trees? That's going to be pretty broad.
Well, I know that in the case of citrus, there are some dwarf citrus trees that people will grow in containers. And you can also grow lemons and limes. And I would actually recommend a container for those because they're not very cold hardy here. So that way you can roll them in the garage or whatever when we're going to have a hard freeze. But I don't have a lot of recommendations outside of citrus for a containerized tree. You may, Christian.
Besides that, I agree with you that particularly for true lemons and for limes, I would recommend keeping those in a container so that you can put them in somewhere, that's going to be cold protected if we do have a cold temperature event. But the other thing that I tell people is that there's no such thing as a plant that won't grow in a container if you've got a big enough container. So, if that's what fits your landscape and fits the needs that you have, or if you just have a small area, I've grown fig trees in containers. I've grown apple trees in containers, just you know, but the only thing that I would specifically definitely keep in a container would be those citrus trees that just aren't really that cold hardy. And the last question I see over in the chat area is actually, it's about insect and disease management. Do you have a scouting program that you use there at the nursery to detect insects or diseases, and how you approach using insecticides and fungicides?
We don't really have any scouting program per se. We advise all and ask all of our employees to help us with that because it's ongoing because our greenhouses are open. So there's plenty access for a lot of insects, and there are plenty of insects in the area. So we just try to put our eyes on our plants all the time because we do a lot of hand watering and hand care to our plant. So that's mainly what we do, visual. And then depending on what the plant types are or the insects are, you know, we try to use pesticides that are least detrimental to the environment. And a couple of years ago, we actually tried using strictly biological ladybugs and whatnot to control a lot of the insects. And that did work to a certain extent. But once everything got cleaned up, they flew away. So as much as we would like to strictly do that, it's a little bit hard with the setup with our greenhouses open and so many surrounding wooded areas with lots of insects. So pretty much visual and just a constant maintenance of our plants. And not to say that there's not going to be bugs on a plant now and then. We try to keep that to a minimum as much as possible. And, you know, if that's ever the case, we will certainly, you know, take it back or treat it for you or whatever we need to do to make that insect free.
Yeah, I can say from experience that Ms. Cuevas does a lot of follow-up with her customers. And when they come in with problems, she's very good about helping them. And I contribute in a very small way to that. So you know, that's the questions that people have, and you know, the sort of the pre-prepared questions that I have. So I'm going to finish with one more question for you, and this is just one I like to ask people who work with plants, and that is, what is your favorite plant and why?
Oh, you caught me off guard with that. I do like, really, after all these years, I like a lot of plants. I really do. I really think one of my favorites might be camellias. Not to say it's my only favorite, but I do really love camellias. And I think because of the season of the year that they bloom, when there's not a lot else going on. But I must say, I like many, many plants.
Okay. I know I was springing in that on you. I think it's a interesting question to ask people, and I'm always interested in people's answers to it. I'd like to close off again. Thank you very much for being willing to come and speak to everyone. Thank you for submitting yourself to the questions and being very generous with your time. I know I appreciate it. I'm sure the others here did as well. And as always, it is a great pleasure to